Hey, Diana, did you know that thinking's really hard?
Mark, that's the dumbest thing you've ever said.
Ladies and gentlemen, jurists and just curious, welcome to the Successful Barrister Podcast. Here you'll learn about marketing, management, and life skills for lawyers that probably won't get you disbarred. Hosted by Marc Whitehead, a seasoned lawyer who remembers when fax machines were cutting edge, and Diana Berry, attorney, COO, and the brains behind the scenes. Together, they are the legal world's most dynamic duo since statutes met regulations. So if you're looking to build a practice, not a prison, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Successful Barrister, where legal legends are made.
And welcome to the Successful Barrister Podcast, the podcast for lawyers about marketing, management, and life skills that probably won't get you disbarred. I'm your host, Marc Whitehead, along with my co-host, Diana Berry, my right hand, my COO. Hey, Diana, what's going on?
Not much, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm good. So
You're excited about today's podcast.
I'm excited about today's podcast because we're talking about the book Paid to Think by David and Lori Goldsmith, which is one of my top 5 books of all time.
Yeah, you've mentioned it a few times.
I've mentioned it in multiple podcasts.
And today is finally here.
Finally popped up on the schedule. So I'm excited. On the flip side, Diana's being kind of in a pissy little mood this morning because she says her day is overbooked and she's fitting me in. And I keep saying, like, no, Diana, this is the highlight of your day because you get to spend an hour with me.
This is a very good point. I do get to spend an hour with you. It's kind of fitting, though, on two sides that we're talking about being paid to think today because I do not have time to think today. And I think you could pay me to think because I'm literally booked in meetings until 4 o'clock today and it started at 7:30. But one of those appointments was my think time. So that was my second point. So it's the first.
Did we rob you of your think time?
No, sir. I did take it. Well, another meeting overlapped it. But all that to say, I did do some think time today, and I was very happy that it was the calm before in the middle of the storm.
All right. So the general thesis of the book, this is the quote that I pulled out. Thinking is the hardest work there is, which is probably why the reason so few engage in it. Now, this is a quote from Henry Ford, had quite a bit of business success.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. We won't get into the personal side of some of the weird crap that Henry Ford pulled. Oh, if you read his biography, just read his biography. It's there. We'll focus simply on the business side, which he was pretty brilliant at. So I think really the real issue is thinking about any random thought is pretty easy, but thinking about what is productive and what gets you ahead in life actually is quite hard. Mm-hmm. And the concept of the book, Paid to Think, which is to give a structure around how leaders of an organization should be thinking. In other words, what are you paid to do as a leader of an organization? Okay? I'm not paid to lick the stamps. I'm not paid to address the envelopes. I'm not paid to do most of the work that goes on in this law firm. I mean, we have 70-something people. I do probably less than 0.01% of the physical work around here.
Of the tasks.
I'm not paid to do that. What am I paid to do? I'm paid to think. Mm-hmm. One of the points that the book brought out right at the very beginning is that the CEO or president of organization, and for our purposes, we'll extend that to the leader of your firm, meaning probably you, should be spending about 90% of their time thinking and about 10% of their time executing, which is a pretty staggering number if you think about it. 90% of your time you should be thinking. Then it goes on to say for your middle management, it ought to be like a 60-40. Even your middle managers ought to be spending most of their time thinking through a number of things, processes, procedures, how to manage people, how to solve problems, so forth. Goes on, so here's where it flips. Frontline managers, which I think in our case we would call our team leaders, the paralegals in charge of the different divisions out there, 40-60. So at that point, we flip over a little bit more, 60% of their time executing, but still a good chunk, 40% of their time just thinking about what they do. On down to frontline employees, which might be more like a 10-90. They're the ones that are actually doing the execution.
The tasks.
They're the ones knocking out the task. But the real question then is, if you're supposed to be spending 90% of your time thinking, well, what the hell should you be thinking about? One of the quotes that I really liked was, "Don't confuse motion with progress," and that includes your thoughts. Don't just assume that thoughts moving through your head are productive thinking. Like I said, a rocking horse keeps moving, but it's not making any progress. So you have to be thinking about the correct things. So there's an overview of how the book describes your thinking. It basically breaks it down into 4 broad categories, which we're going to come back and we're going to break it down in our next segment. But just to tease it out a little bit, the 4 broad categories are strategizing, learning, which I love to do. I spend a lot of time learning. Spent this morning reading up on just some random things regarding the ERISA statutes, not because I had any specific task in mind. It was just I thought I needed to get a general more overview of a particular topic. Third one is performing, thinking about performance. How are you going to execute on your plans? And here's the fun one, the Nostradamus of it. The last one is forecasting. Part of your job as a leader of a firm, a leader of an organization, is to try to predict the future. Or maybe predict alternative futures. Well, if it goes this way, then this is how we need to react. And if it goes this way, this is how we need to react. And we need to be prepared for all the possible things that could possibly happen in the future. So I always thought about forecasting the future is not necessarily about forecasting the correct future, but forecasting the reasonable possible outcomes and making contingency plans depending on whatever direction it goes. Particularly law. We're highly subject to the political whims of the world. Statutes and regulations can change in an instant. So that's kind of the outline of how Goldsmith here thinks about thinking. But he really, through the book, walks you through a very structured way to do it. And I thought it was brilliant. And it, again, like I said, it is one of my top 5 books of all time that I highly recommend to anybody. Have you read the book?
I have not.
You've not read the book?
I did read the summary in preparation for today's podcast.
Okay. So what did you think, just in general?
I guess he breaks down and makes it kind of thinking is obviously this whole amorphous concept that everyone's not really sure. Okay, well, I scheduled think time. Now what am I supposed to do with my think time? And so it's kind of, he breaks it down into easy concepts, which is pretty cool.
Right. And the way you and I think are going to be slightly differently, because I'm going to be thinking more in the visionary role. I'm going to be thinking more in the marketing role, how to bring in business, how to convert business. Whereas your job, in more operations, you're thinking more about how to execute that vision.
Absolutely.
So your thinking process is going to have a different lens on it than my thinking process, which is good. And I think as you work through the organization, everybody's thinking process is going to be through their particular lens of hopefully the clearly defined objectives that you've given for each person
their position
within your organization. So that's always thought about that is when you have positions within an organization, your positions should be defined by objectives, not by titles. People get too hung up on titles. Like my title is this, that, or the other. I'm like, no, I don't care about your title. What's the objective of your job? Why are you here? How can we define success? How do we know if you have won or not? And that's defined by what your objective is. So with that, when we return, we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of how to think.
This podcast is sponsored by Marc Whitehead Associates, a national disability benefits law firm. Marc Whitehead runs a firm of over 60 dedicated people whose mission is to make a difference in the lives of our injured and disabled clients. Marc represents disabled claimants in Social Security disability, private disability insurance, and veterans disability claims in all 50 states. Marc Whitehead is double board certified in both Social Security disability law and personal injury trial law. Marc has litigated disability cases in over 40 states and counting and can help your clients too. Stop throwing your phone calls away. Call Marc Whitehead at 701-VIP-LEAD. That's 701-VIP-LEAD. Or visit our website at disabilitydenials.com. Referral fees are paid in all jurisdictions where it is permitted. Refer us your disability cases today and know that your clients will be in good hands.
And we're back. All right, Diana. So we're going to talk about paid to think, how to think. And we're going to try to not make this book report-y, as you have complained that sometimes we tend to do.
I've commented, not complained.
So we're trying to relate this to how we actually execute this within the firm.
Well, so I guess the book report part of it is that, so for the visual learners out there, he has, Goldsmith has identified, you said 4 main categories of how you think. Mm-hmm. And they are, I guess they flow from one to the next.
Correct.
And within, there's the strategizing, which has 4 activities. Learning has 3, performing has 4, and then forecasting is the 12th.
Right.
Okay. And that's how we're going to talk about paid to think and how you apply it to your law firm.
But how we apply it. So anybody can go read the book, which I highly suggest. But all right, so the first one is strategizing. And the way I think about it, the first thing you have to do when strategizing about your business, is kind of come up with a plan. And what's the first part of that plan is like, all right, what sandbox are you going to play in? And we've talked about this in prior podcasts about the different sandbox I have played in throughout my legal career. Mm-hmm. We've done the whole criminal, the whole bankruptcy side, the whole personal injury side. Those are the different sandboxes that I've played in over time. But ultimately, picking that niche, and I think that's really the key here, is when you first start to strategize and you first start to formulate your plans to how to run your businesses, is what niche do you want to compete in? Business is all about competition. There's no area of the law out there where you don't have competition. So you have to pick, quite frankly, you have to pick your competitors.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I was looking at this and kind of working my way through my law practice, in my mind, I want to pick an area. I want to pick my competitors where the competition is not as fierce. That just kind of makes common sense. And I found out real quickly when I used to be a PI lawyer that the competition there was insanely fierce.
Still is.
And still is. It's getting worse.
Yeah.
For fewer and fewer cases. Like every PI lawyer out there is advertising for car wrecks. Well, guess what? Car wrecks are becoming fewer and fewer. You're having self-driving cars. You're having automatic braking. You have all the safety features of car. The death rate in automobile accidents is going down over the years. It's honest.
Which is a great thing.
It's a great thing. And I would say that the PI lawyers can take a bow for that. Mm-hmm. We have forced the automobile industry into, making safer vehicles. Great. The problem is they're slowly putting themselves out of business. Yet they're competing more and more for the same type of case, which is the first thing when we began strategizing and planning for the future. And this was back in the aughts. Is that how you call it? The aughts?
I have never heard that until you. So
yeah, you have the 80s, the 90s, the aughts, and then you have the teens. Is that
Tens?
the tens, the teens? Boy, this is the 20s is easy. We all know the 20s.
Yeah. Which century though?
Yes.
But you're in the aughts.
So back in the aughts.
Okay.
Aught 7, aught 8. We began to transition out of the personal injury world because we found a more of a blue ocean. Not that there's no competition, but it's lesser. Mm-hmm. I still think there's plenty of areas in personal injury that are blue ocean that people don't think about. But it's the lowest common denominator. Everybody wants to go back to the car wreck. So anyway, I'm on see how we went on a soapbox tangent right out of the gate.
You did, sir, and I'm not sure where we're going, so I can't bring us back center.
The point was what sandbox do you want to play in? That is
developing your plans. That's one of the first.
Plan
yep.
is the first thing. Is where do you want to compete?
So Goldsmith says that there are 4 activities in strategizing that he kind of says one flows into the next. So you first develop your plan, then kind of select or create new products, establish alliances, and then you leverage technology. And that's part of his whole strategizing concept.
So for us, it's not products, it's services. Although I suppose you could have some ancillary products come out of the legal industry,
sure.
softwares and things like that. But let's not focus on those things that I don't know a damn thing about. So services. So what services do you want to provide? In other words, this flows out of the sandbox. Where do you want to compete? So, there's different types in our world. There's 3 different types of disability and we've chose to compete and offer all 3 of those services. We're extending that victory a little bit, extending into elder law. Again, that's a service that we are going to be offering here in the near future. But all of this came about by a lot of thinking. So remember when we started talking about elder law, this was over a year ago. We met, I think we set up a lunch with
Probably
Steve.
18 months ago, actually.
With Steve Riley to talk and pick his brain about it because he knows a lot about the industry. So we've been thinking a long time. So we didn't just hang out a shingle without planning it, thinking about it. We've come up with a marketing plan. We've come up with an operational plan. We've looked at the financial side of things. We've looked at the technical side of things. 18 months we've been working on this before quote unquote product launch, service launch. So we've been thinking long and hard about that. And we're not overextending ourselves. We're taking it in an incremental approach. And if it fails miserably, then, we haven't lost anything. We're fine. But we think through that. With that, establishing alliances. So we have, in the elder law field, we've started establishing alliances with other practitioners in different parts of the country that we're not going to compete with to be able to pick their brain, to be able to look at how they structure their firms, how they, what kind of software do they use, how do they staff their people, how do they train their people. We've been establishing alliances with other folks. Traditionally, we've done this with all our practice areas. We have a lot of alliances with personal injury law firms. We don't do what they do, but what we do is tangential. It complements what they do. And so we've established these alliances over time. This didn't come out just out of nowhere. You had to think about it. You had to think specifically, strategically. Who do we want to establish these alliances with? Who can help us? Who can we help in turn? And I think the last one we talked about, and we talked about this a lot, is leveraging technology.
We do talk a lot about that.
You love the technology side.
I think it's one of the easiest levers to pull in, especially in the service industry, and especially with our type of law, and especially right now.
Yeah. So, the whole point of technology is working quicker, faster, cheaper, easier.
More consistently for me, obviously. Yep,
fewer mistakes.
Yep, the high C in the room. What's consistency? People are going to get sick. One of our team leads was out, for really badly for the last, 5 business days, and it's like, well, who was doing her job? We're glad she's doing better, but I think technology would have helped with some of her more routine tasks.
So, with all of this, in this first part of strategizing, the thing you have to think about the most, in my opinion, is managing your priorities, because there's so many ideas that can fly through your head. And if you try to do everything, you're going to get bogged down. So you have to think about the priorities. You have to think about the ultimate outcome that you're trying to achieve. What am I trying to achieve? And then how do I get there? What are the priorities? And you have to be very careful about going off on tangents like we tend to do.
I think that priorities.
You and I are a collective we.
We are the collective.
We are the collective.
I'm the royal we, part of the royal we. I do think that that was for me when kind of studying up for this podcast, the managing priorities part hit for me, because I think that as lawyers, which regardless of where you are in the law firm or in your career, whether you're closer to my era or Marc's or my position or Marc's position, managing priorities is universal, and you think that you get paid as a lawyer to produce work product or to settle the case, to reach an outcome. When reality, I think the thesis of the book is that actually sitting and carving out time to just think, where they're at the end of your allotted time, you may not have a clear, defined work product like, oh, I have finished discovery now, or that can be very hard, I think, just for people in general, not just attorneys. And so managing your priorities and making time to think about really what is the real problem, getting to the heart of the real problem, not just what you think is that fivefold why that we talked about in a couple episodes ago. I think that's the hard part that people just can't ever get to.
So there's no end game here.
Exactly.
You're going project to project. Business, I think we've talked about this before, business is an infinite game. Unless you're shooting for shutting your practice down or selling it at some point, it really is an infinite game. So you're simply moving from the best available project to the next best available project to the next available project, best available project, repeatedly ad infinitum. So you always have to think about it in that way.
Yep. And we've talked a lot of, I think your examples were, about the business and how you've expanded in your career. But I think that my position is an example of that iterative stage where, so I bet you, but obviously I wasn't here then, but before you decided to hire a COO, I'm sure you talked to, let me guess, your Ada cousins, you got job descriptions from people. You did not have chat back then, but you probably asked people for their job descriptions, and then you put one together that you thought you might like, and then you probably talked to Nora about it. So that was leveraging your network with that. And then you finally found me. We agreed that I was going to come work for you, and that should have been the end of the quote unquote project. But then now you had to onboard me.
Well, that just starts the next project.
Exactly.
The next project is to onboard you, and then the next project is to set you free. And the next project is to collaborate with you. It's like I said, it's an infinite game. It never ends.
And I think staffing is something that everybody can, everyone's struggling with right now. And so whether it's because you've lost someone and you're having to regroup and figure out why you lost someone, or whether that's because you're creating a new position like we recently did, you have to think about it. Like, what do I really want out of this position? What is the outcome, to go back to something you said, for this position? I
think that's really, to put a bow on the strategizing side of this, is you have to begin with the end in mind. In other words, what is the outcome that you are seeking? You always have to start there.
Well, I think that's great if you know. Sometimes, though, you really don't know. Like, I think it takes a long time for you to sit and really think, what is the real problem? Like, sometimes staffing is okay. Is it that the caseload's too high? So that's a real simple, I just need to add a body. Mm-hmm. Are we following the processes that we set out? That's a process problem, not a people person. Is there technology out there, to Goldsmith's point of leveraging technology? Is there technology that we can utilize rather than adding a person? The problem isn't always clear for me, I think, in my position.
All right. So to put a bow on this, as I was taught in Depot College of how to summarize a deposition, actually to ask a summary question of your deponent after you've gone down a rabbit hole, because we just went down a rabbit hole. What he says with regard to strategizing, 4 simple steps, which is developing plans, creating, in our case, new services, establishing alliances, and leveraging your technologies, which to me the key is begin with the end in mind. What is the outcome that you're seeking? All right, next, learning, acquiring knowledge, okay? And I think what we're talking about here is not necessarily for a specific purpose necessarily, although that's great, but basically to acquire knowledge for the simple act of acquiring knowledge, because it promotes the development of new ideas. So I study a lot of areas of law, knowing that I will probably never get into those areas of law because I'm just looking for ideas. I'm looking for the business model. I'm looking for, what are the cool things there. I look at non-legal. I have read many books over how Warren Buffett conducts his business, how Microsoft or Apple built their business. Going outside of legal, not for the purposes that I'm ever going to open a software company, because I'm not, but because what can I learn from other industries? What can I learn from other people? You have to basically broaden your mind. And we get that all the time in Atticus. That's one of the great things about Atticus is they frequently look outside of the legal industry for new ideas and new knowledge.
Yeah, no, I think you do a great job of this, Marc, in terms of just, you're always like, I was listening to this podcast. I'm like, how do you have time to listen to so many podcasts? And it's some of them
because I have a really long commute. That's how.
Well, we'll just attribute it to acquiring knowledge, as Goldsmith would say. You listen to, like you said, but some legal podcasts that we've mentioned before and that you've been a guest speaker on, but then also you listen to some non-legal ones that you just mentioned, and you're always telling me about books that I need to read. And so I think it's a good way to stay relevant and expand your current way of thinking.
Paid to Think doesn't say a damn thing about legal in the whole damn book. Not a thing. That doesn't mean it's not relevant to our industry. Speaking of which, so my favorite quote within this section was, your role as a leader requires that you are perpetually and actively engaged in acquiring awareness. I like how he phrased it, awareness and knowledge, because learning by default does little to improve your decision making, particularly in your leadership role. Really liked how he phrased that, but to me that it's about awareness. You become aware of your landscape, aware of things that are going on, aware of the political climate. Good Lord, knows we're in a weird political climate right now. How is that going to affect us? Is that going to affect us positively, negatively? Is it a net neutral? What is it?
So it's funny because mine, I don't know if they're in the same part of the book, but my favorite part of the section quote was, while awareness has its merits, sometimes the missing ingredient that hinders progress isn't a tactical plan, time, or money. It's in-depth knowledge.
True.
So when you talk about acquiring knowledge, it's looking at, things differently, right? So not just the podcast, but reading the book and really trying to get an in-depth understanding of whatever your problem is or the industry you're trying to break into.
In a former lifetime, I never used to get out of my little cocoon. I thought we're in Harris County, Texas. I thought going up to Montgomery County, which is the county just north of us, was a massive trip. That was a foreign land for me.
Well, just to be clear, it is and it is. But
well,
also...
it is. Those people in Montgomery County are strange. I'm just telling you.
We still like them, but yes, it just geographically speaking, it is. It's far.
But my thinking didn't really take off and explode until I realized that hey, there's a thing called an airplane, and you can get on it and you can go some places and acquire knowledge. So I started going to places far near, like going to AAJ. I think the first AAJ I went to was in Vancouver, Canada. Not only did I leave the state, I left the country.
You left the country in pursuit of your acquiring
to go to Vancouver, Canada. We do Atticus in Orlando. We go to Pilma in New Orleans, and this year in Denver. Traveling to Nova, traveling to Nosker. All of a sudden, going to all of these far-flung places to acquire knowledge that you just can't get by, sitting in your office. Now, these days it's a little bit easier because things are virtual, but in the olden days, I called pre-pandemic the olden days, when you actually had to necessarily get on a plane to go to these places. But it opened my eyes to learning new things, and not just about the practice of law, but about the environment that we're in. Everything we do is political. AAJ, people don't realize, is their primary function is to lobby Congress because Congress affects federal law. TTLA, their primary function is not to put on CLEs. That's how they get their membership. But their primary function is to lobby the Texas legislature, and every state has some equivalent organization. And what you learn by going to these organizations is you learn the political landscape, which the political landscape dictates the economic landscape that you're trying to operate in. So you have to know that. You know, we had major political fights in Texas in the early aughts, that didn't really turn out all that well and led to me changing direction, business-wise, because of the way the state legislature basically changed Texas law. So, but I knew that was coming. It didn't hit me blindsided. I saw it coming. We saw it coming for several years. So we were able to adapt and adjust. Goes back to our last topic of forecasting. You need to keep your pulse, on the political and economic news out there, which basically means you need to be aware. You need to increase your awareness. The other part of awareness, what about your competitors? We all have competitors. What are your competitors doing? How are you doing opposition research, as they would say in political parlance, or competitive research? Competitive intelligence, I think, is the way the book phrases. They try to be a little more antiseptic about it. But what are you doing about that? Since we rely so heavily on digital marketing, we do opposition research fairly frequently, like at least once a year, and sometimes a lot more frequently than that, of what our chief competitors are doing in the digital space. I have a suspicion they're probably doing the same thing to me.
Yeah.
But simple things, you hire companies, what keywords are your competitors bidding on? You can figure that stuff out. How are they promoting themselves on the internet? How much are they spending on pay-per-click? How much activity are they doing organically? You can do the same thing on television. There are ways that you can get the television spend in each market to see what your competitors are doing. You can actually watch their ads. You can go to the internet and pull up every ad out there and see what they're advertising for. There's lots of ways that you can, check out what your competitors are doing, because it's just smart business. You don't want to get left behind. All right, so moving on, we're going to move on to performing and leading. And the quote that I pulled out from there was, every leader must rely on other people to manage some portion of their tactical activities, even if the leader operates within a small organization and executes on their own at times. So thinking about how you're going to set up your structure, set up your organization, this is your strike zone, and getting people to execute on what you've designed, I think is a key part of your overall thinking strategy. In other words, how do I now that I've thought up these great ideas, how do I create an organization and a training program and a staffing program to actually make the sausage?
Yep, I think empowering people to execute on your dream, or getting people to buy into your vision, is one of the, I'd say, a secret sauce of this position, because people are the one thing you can't always rely on in terms of just doing the same thing over and over again, because they're obviously not robots. And so you have technology that produces the same result every single time, and that can aid you. But people are, I think, the kind of the secret sauce to what I do. And it's the fun part.
So one of our core values is teamwork. And I like how we define teamwork, because basically what we say when we're defining teamwork is that collectively, we can be more productive than we are individually. In other words, we're more than just the sum of our parts. There's a synergy that comes with breaking down complex tasks into simpler tasks, and then training people on how to do those simpler tasks, and then adding those simpler tasks back up to create, 1 + 1 makes 3.
Yes.
We talk about that all the time, which means a lot of what we have to think about is how to break down complex tasks into simpler tasks that we can train people to do. This is what Henry Ford was great at.
Yep, the assembly line.
Yes. All right, so So Diana, you're in charge of operations, which basically means you're the one that deals most directly with people. I mean, you're the people person.
I am the current people
Yes,
person.
you're the people person within the organization. And you got to get people to do what you want them to do. You got to get them to do it quickly, cheaply, efficiently, correctly. Mm-hmm. You know, when you're thinking about how to make that happen within this law firm, you know, how do you do it? Where do you start?
I always spend a lot of time making sure we agree on the problem, the exact problem that we both agree on, that we're trying to solve.
Thinking about the problem.
Yep. And then, and I'll probably spend a meeting just making sure we agree on the problem. Because then if we all agree on what the problem is, one, we're more likely to make sure that we're getting to the outcome that makes everybody happy, rather than me trying to solve for, a technology problem when they really decided it was really a process problem. And honestly, by the time that we get to the solution, I think that they then have buy-in, because now we agree on the problem. And then if we get to the solution, then it's not, trying to solve for a different issue.
So this hits me just, we always have people complain. We have too many meetings. You just read that in the literature, too many meetings, death by meeting. What are meetings? Meetings are group thinking exercises. And I think if you think of a meeting in that regard and you go into it with that attitude, like, I'm not here to go through an agenda, I'm not here to kill time, I'm here to have a group thought exercise. Yep. And then from that thought exercise, we're going to come up with a plan or a mini plan, or at least identify the problem for further investigation. If you think about it that way, that's what meetings are.
That's where I definitely start. And then the meetings definitely become more structured over time to make sure that we allocate responsibilities. And then, we'll just probably beta test some solution. So for example, not to get into the weeds, I set out a process in our Social Security Disability section, and I did it with our team lead for a while before we realized, okay, this works. And then we rolled it out to the team. And there was feedback, right? Well, maybe this response could be tweaked, and we incorporate those. So it's definitely going back and forth, but trying to keep the most relevant people in the meeting to make the best use of their time, for sure.
All right. So the next little category here under performance is selling continuously. And this one I love because I am the marketing person within
I should say that makes sense, because I don't like it.
She doesn't like it at all, but part of performance is thinking about how to brand yourself, thinking about how to market yourself, thinking about how to get your clients to continuously do business with you. It's called a client retention plan. How to cross-sell your services to your clients. You have to think about that. We've been thinking about that a lot, how to cross-sell our elder law services to our disability clients. So part of performance is thinking about how to keep promoting yourself, because we are a business, and you constantly have to generate new business or you die. So you have to think about that continuously. How do I keep that feedback loop going where I continually develop new business, I continually provide good service, I continually promote myself to my former clients so they will help me bring on new clients or at least give me repeat business. But that is a thought process and unto itself. I enjoy that side. That's kind of one of the fun things, I think. And you hate it. I know you hate it.
I'm not very good at the self-promotion or any of that stuff. So it's a good partnership, Marc.
I don't have a problem promoting myself at all. Not at all, people. That's why we're here.
Low I here on this side of the table, but I think he brings up a good point about the cross-selling and some of that. It's been interesting because of our Atticus involvement, listening to some of the flat fee attorneys, the estate planners, and how they develop client care programs as a way to stay obviously in front of their clients on a monthly basis, but also to develop an alternate kind of stream of revenue. And so you can always get creative, even if you are a flat fee attorney out there. There are different ways that you can stay in front of your client base to sell continuously.
All right, with that, so we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to wrap up with the fun part, the Nostradamus part of how we could possibly see into the future. I'm Marc Whitehead, a lawyer, entrepreneur, and business coach. Thanks so much for tuning into the Successful Barrister podcast. We have a blast creating it, and I hope you find it helpful. If our chats have sparked your interest, I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me an email at marc@marcwhitehead.com. That's Marc spelled with a C. Enjoying the Successful Barrister newsletter. Even better, let's hop on a call. I'd love to chat about how we can collaborate, share ideas, or just catch up. Real quickly recapping.
Okay.
The enterprise thinking, I think, is how the book that we've been talking about talks about it. Strategizing, developing plans, creating new services, establishing alliances, leveraging technology. Then it goes on to learning, which is acquiring knowledge, growing global awareness, watching your competitors, stalking, as I like to say, stalking your competitors. Finally performing, which basically means leading the charge, empowering your people, innovation, and constantly selling yourself. So the last one is sort of a standalone, which is forecasting the future, the Nostradamus of the thing. When I start trying to forecast the future, I start with looking to the past, because trends tend to, especially in the legal world where we're so slow to move and adapt, is that I think it's helpful to look at past trends, both within your own business and within, the legal landscape generally. I certainly have morphed over time and have moved over time. But none of us can really predict the future, but we can make educated guesses about certain possibilities or certain potential paths that may occur. And that's kind of how I think about forecasting the future, is making contingency plans depending on what might happen. I kind of use the Pentagon as an analogy. The U.S. military, they have dozens and dozens of different war plans prepared for different scenarios. They don't know which one is going to happen, if anything is going to happen, but they have planned out scenarios. I was reading the other night, we actually have a planned scenario in case the UK attacks us, our closest ally. There is actually a war plan for that, as silly as that sounds.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to suggest you go that detailed, but I think, the way Goldsmith basically lays it out in the book, kind of a three-pronged contingency plan. If you look at something, what are the three possible or most likely outcomes? Mm-hmm. And then plan for those three things. Now, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 4. I don't know. He comes up with 3. Great, whatever. But that's how I view forecasting for the future.
Yeah, so I think that, for me, forecasting the future, it's obviously envisioning success is part of a mindset thing, but also then secondarily, it gives you confidence to go from thinking to action. If you can see how, okay, I've considered all of the things I've done, the strategizing and the empowering of the people and all that, now I can go from thinking to moving forward with my plans. I liked the 3 questions that he asked. The first question was, what if our forecasts turned out to be exactly on the mark? His second question is, what if only part of what we forecast comes to fruition? And then thirdly, what if our forecasts turn out to be completely off the mark and a markedly different scenario plays out? And it's almost like you have to envision the worst case scenario, say, okay, if that happens, I accept it, and then and we'll still be okay, right? It's the whole elder law thing. You've said it multiple times in our podcast, because I think that that's where you had to get in your mind that if elder law is, we launch it and it's not a success like the other 3 practice areas, the other 4 practice areas, then we're still going to be okay. It was a very good jump into the market. And so if our forecasts turn out to be completely off the mark, the firm is still going to be okay.
We'll be fine. So it's funny. So yesterday I was looking at our 2025 business plan that you and I have been working on. As an attachment in the back of the 2025 business plan was a projection that we made, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the projection was, what if we doubled in size over the next 3 years? So basically starting in 2022, what happens if in 2025 we double? What would that caseload look like? What would our
revenue look
like? What would our revenue look like? What would all of these things look like? And we still keep it as an attachment to the back of the business plan that we update every year. And I looked at it and I was like that was way wrong. We missed it so badly. We were quite over-optimistic, quite frankly, about our ability to grow the practice. I mean, we've done okay, but we were thinking in terms of what happens if we double in 3 years, which we didn't come anywhere close to doubling in 3 years. We've done okay. But I was looking at it and I was just chuckling because I was just like looking at the assumptions that we made, trying to predict the future. And we missed it. Now, was that fatal? Did that sink us? No. I mean, because we adapted. But that would be an example of being overly optimistic. And what we were doing was we were like, all right, if we did double the size of our caseload, what would our infrastructure have to look like? What would our cash flow have to look like? What would our borrowing capacity off our bank's line of credit need to look like if that were to occur? Mm-hmm. So we started preparing for that. Now, it didn't happen, but are we any worse for that? No, because we did a lot of prep work. So that would be an example of planning that didn't forecast the future correctly, but it still was beneficial because it made us think. Yeah,
but it made you think about the business more strategically rather than just assuming status quo.
Okay, so I referenced it earlier, but and without beating the dead horse, we're in the business of law, and law is made by politicians. So being aware, being able to try to forecast into the future what politicians are going to do, and we will name no names here, but what the political landscape looks like over the next 3 years and 11 months. What is that going to look like? And how that's going to affect us. I mean, I think about that. So first thing I thought about was the Social Security Administration, the government, just gave us a raise this year because we're fee capped. And our fee cap traditionally, or at least over the last several years, was $7,200 a case. So we're artificially fee capped, which has artificially kept our revenues down. We got a raise this year to $9,200. Yay. So we're now all stoked. Now I'm thinking, could that raise be taken away under the current political circumstances? Could it happen? I don't think it's going to happen, but could it happen? I can't discount the possibility, so I have to think about that. I have to plan what would be the worst case scenario if our raise got taken away.
And what would be the worst case scenario?
Well, the worst case scenario is that we would probably have to contract on our growth plans because our revenue would contract based on what our projections would be. So our revenue would not hit our projections if somehow we lost our raise, okay? There's always the chance that the Social Security Administration gets defunded. This is actually a more likely scenario. What would that mean? That would mean that the work would slow down. If there were fewer federal workers within the Social Security Administration, then right now it's taken us, 8 to 10 to 12 months to get through the initial processes of the Social Security application. If we had a work slowdown because of defunding of the agency, maybe it stretches out to 18 months. How would that affect our cash flow? It wouldn't be good. I can promise you that. Mm-hmm. So I have to think about that. So what would that contingency fee plan look like? The flip is, what if they actually funded it properly, and then the work times would go down, our processing times could go down to where they were pre-pandemic, that would be awesome. I'm not optimistic about that, but I'm sitting here. Do we have the status quo? Is it going to stay the same? Is it going to get better? Is it going to get worse, depending on our current political climate? Good question. I'm having to think about contingency plans for each of those scenarios. So I'm forecasting the future depending on good, bad, or ugly. All right. With that, I think I've pontificated about all I can about predicting the future, because the reality is we can't predict the future, but we can come up with scenarios. We can come up with contingency plans. Or contingent plans. But with that, any final thoughts before we wrapped today? We're already going a little bit long. So.
I know. Just I'm going to go look up the book and figure out how I can think better. All
right. It's all about thinking, people. So with that, we're getting the high sign that we're out of time. So I want to thank everybody for listening to the Successful Barrister podcast, where legal legends are made. I'm Marc.
And I'm Diana.
And together we're the dynamic duo of law. Remember to rate and review us. And if you enjoy this, tell your friends. And we're asking all of our friends out there to make sure you go give us a 5-star review. We're really working hard on that. So I've gotten lots of people that have texted me, emailed me, saying how much they love the podcast. That's great. Go leave a review. You know who you are, people. Visit us at thesuccessfulbarrister.com and visit our sponsor, Marc Whitehead Associates, a national disability law firm, at disabilitydenials.com. And with that, we're out of here. we could flip it, and you could do, "Hey, Marc," and I could say, "Hey, Diana, that's the dumbest thing we could flip it.
Every time I hear myself say that's the dumbest thing, I was like, why on earth do we just not record that part and play it again every single time? Why do I have to say it I understand why you have to change yours. Why do I have to change mine every time?
You don't. You should say the same thing every time.
And you're unhappy with it every time. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Somebody's got to get to Stretch Lab.
I know. I need passion from your answer. It's like, Marc, that's
1:30.
thing I've ever heard. You ever take acting classes?
No, sir. Remember, raging introvert. I have decided that's my new word. I almost backed out of my friend trip in April because it became a very large group. Yeah, I know. I'm like, I don't want to go. I'm going, but I'm gonna. Rick said I couldn't call it our honeymoon, but in my head, it's just I'm gonna be like, I want to go sometime with my husband now. Bye, guys.